Physio, yeah.
sports physiotherapist?
Physiotherapist, yeah.
All right, and that's the question I'm going to start with. So let me hold on. I'll take a quick pause, and we will get to. I'm going to record. I'm going to hit record.
Recording in progress.
Today on All About Fitness, we're talking about all things running with Owen Everard. How you doing today, Owen?
Hi, Pete. Thanks so much for having me on. Big fan of the podcast. So delighted to be here and looking forward to chatting.
Well, thank you for joining me, and I really appreciate your time. And I'm really looking for this conversation because I want to talk to you about something that I think a lot of listeners have an issue with, and that's transitioning from their indoor training to their spring training. And we'll get to that. I want to get to that because we know that happens. But first, I mean, your background is you're an elite runner, you have a PhD in biomechanics, and you're a sports physiotherapist.
Yeah.
And now, Owen, you're in Ireland, and I'm obviously in the States. And the one question I've always had, because I've heard the term physiotherapist for years, what the heck is a physio, and what does a physiotherapist do? I mean, could you describe that a little bit? Because I'm sure a lot of listeners are like me. They've heard the term physiotherapist, but they're not sure what the heck they do.
Yeah, you call them physical therapists over in America.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm a chartered physiotherapist, which is like a physical therapist in America. But we have I would have worked in hospitals and done the degrees that way, and then you work in like outpatients and with musculoskeletal medicine. So it's like a physical therapist. We have you're actually way stricter regulated in terms of if someone I've done courses in manipulation, so I can kind of do chiropractic adjustments, I can do dry needling, and then a lot of like massage and stuff like that, plus the rehabilitation side of things. So it's a little bit it's not as strictly regulated, so you get to have more of a mix of skills than maybe a physical therapist would in America. But it's exactly that degree. So physiotherapy is physical therapy in the US, but ironically we have people called physical therapists that are more like massage therapists. So if someone said they were a physical therapist here, they would mean they're kind of like a sports massage therapist as opposed to a physiotherapist. So that's why it's the distinction.
That makes sense, because what I always thought, Owen, was that a physiotherapist is more like an athletic trainer. I mean, they work like in the States.
No,
an athletic trainer works on acute injury. If I get injured on the field, before I get drug off the pitch on a stretcher, it's usually the ATC, the athletic trainer, taking a look at me to make sure that they don't need to send me off in an ambulance.
Yeah, exactly. I actually did athletic therapy and training. So I went to Montreal, and then I went on and did a master's in physiotherapy. So yeah, so you'd have athletic trainers here, but again, they'd probably do a bit more hands-on work and stuff like that than the athletic trainers over in America. But yeah, no, a physiotherapist is a physical therapist, so kind of hospital-based plus musculoskeletal stuff like that.
And then where are you based out of? Do you see your clients in a hospital? Where do you see them?
No. So here you can do private. A lot of the physios do private practice, and a lot of them work in hospitals as well. So I would see people for private practice. I lecture here in it's called the like a university in the southeast of the country, and then I'm doing like sports Pilates a lot online, and I'm working on this new product called the Back Aware Belt. So, multiple things to keep me busy.
Well, and that's honestly, I mean, listeners are used to hearing that. Nobody in fitness has one job. I don't think anybody in no matter where you're located in the world, no matter what you're doing, if your job involves making half naked people sweaty, I think, Owen, that you often wear more than one hat. So now
I think it's a good idea, though. You always need like multiple things to keep you busy.
Well, you need multiple things to keep you busy, and frankly, to be 100% honest, you need multiple revenue streams in order to keep your head above water. But what got you interested? What caused you to go get a PhD in biomechanics? What was it that caused you to become interested in physiotherapy and helping people move better?
Yeah, well, it was that movement, especially the biomechanics piece. I was on the path to becoming a kind of physiotherapist, and I would have done placement over in America or in Canada, in Montreal, in 2008, and someone came in, they were talking about the functional movement screen, and it just kind of clicked for me. I was like, oh my god, that's such a, because the rehabilitations we would have been learning about were very okay, you fix the hamstring, you know, here's how you strengthen the hamstring, here's how you stretch, here's the things. And like when they were talking about like, look at the overall person, look at the movements, it just really clicked. It's like, oh my God, that's the missing piece that I hadn't seen. So I got really into movement then, starting with the like functional movement screen, but then just moving out into more like movement patterns in that paradigm, and got very interested in that. And then that led me to work a bit more on movement analysis in more of a biomechanical sense, and look at like the back and how we move and the knee, and like you know, like how the mechanics can influence injury risk. So yeah, it just kind of progressed on from there, really.
Well, I'm surprised. The one thing that always surprised me, Owen, and I'm interested in your experience since you went to schools, obviously, in different countries. And the one thing that's a little bit disappointing is the fact that a lot of academic programs are still teaching this kind of isolationist, revisionist approach to exercise. When you started learning about the interconnected, how did that change your approach, or how did you start looking at your academic work then? If we understand, like if you go through the FMS and Gray, I interviewed Lee Burton, one of the creators, a few months ago, and I reran Gray's interview. So for listeners, the functional movement screen identifies your levels of stability and mobility and makes sure that all muscles and joints can work together. So as you're studying this, you learn the FMS. How did that change what you've been learning in traditional schooling?
Like, it didn't really change what I was learning in schooling, but how I was applying things just dramatically changed. So like, I love that joint by joint approach, that every like joint has, so an ankle should be primarily mobile, a knee should only flex and extend, it shouldn't have excessive movement left or right, a hip should be, a ball and socket should have good movement, the lower back should be stable, and that if the joint is tight or not moving correctly, usually there's 3 reasons, which we can talk about if you want, but you need to kind of correct that. And then a lot of times, I find for injury risk, what happens is that people are like, so say an Achilles problem, say with a lot of running injuries, they're all passive structures. They're all like plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis, knee pain, hip pain. And the thing is, like, say with an Achilles tendon, people are like, oh, you need to do heel drops, heel raises. With knee problems, oh yeah, do your squats, do your lunges. And it's like, that area is already overloaded, in my opinion, and thinking of an overall body. So it's like, it's not that this is weak and needs to be strengthening. It's like there's other areas that are not doing their jobs. So for me, like with an Achilles tendon or Achilles or whatever way you want to say it, rather than just doing more work on the calf, I love doing like single leg deadlifts and like holding that for like say 10 seconds. Get the foot muscles burning, get the hamstring, get the glute working more, and take pressure off the area, as opposed to just focusing on this area and ignoring the fact that it's part of a bigger chain. And I have much better success, people say, holding a single leg deadlift than I ever did people doing like heel drops, heel raises, and trying to strengthen an overloaded area already, as opposed to strengthen the weak area that's connected to it. And I could go on and on about that, like hamstrings, the same, working on like pelvic stability and not having an anterior pelvic tilt, putting the hamstring into a stretch, got me way better results than just working on a hamstring, but the hamstring's in a poorly lengthened position, so it's not moving correctly. And then wondering why, well, I'm strengthening it and it's still not effective. It's like, yeah, you need to correct everything else and then work on the strength if that's still an issue.
Well, and I think that's the big problem, Owen, is I think that we still, for whatever reason, a lot of people, when they look at exercise, they do exercise selection on that old bodybuilder paradigm, meaning I want to only exercise the hamstrings. I'm only going to exercise my calf. Why is that such? Why should, if you're a bodybuilder, and I always try to point this out, because if you're an aesthetic athlete and your purpose is to try not to pass out while you're on a stage in your underwear. And I'm being very specific about that, because anybody who's ever watched anybody diet down in the last 24 to 36 hours before a show, it really is an effort. It takes a lot of work not to pass out from lack of carbohydrate. I mean, let's be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
And I often describe bodybuilding contests as more of a chemistry experiment as opposed to an exercise outcome, because really it's those who have the best nutrition, which biochemically in the body is chemistry. So when we look at it, why is this bodybuilding model of isolation, why should we discard that? If we're an athlete, if we're a runner, if we like to go out and play, if we like to go out and hike, why should we be avoiding those isolation exercises? And what type of exercises do you think, in your experience, would be better for us?
Because they're not functional. Like, as you said, you see the opposite. You see the same thing with powerlifting. If you're talking about the sport, of course, but I see people, say a rugby player or someone doing anything, and they're arching their back like crazy, and they're like, oh well, I saw that guy do it and for a powerlifting, so that's the way you bench press. No. He's in a competition, and he knows if I arch my back up loads, I don't have to bring my arms down as far. And that's easier to complete the lift. That's the only reason he's doing that. And they make up all this like mumbo jumbo of, oh, it's stabilizing. It's like, that's not functional in terms of how you'll ever have your back or your core. So I always think, like, look at the full movement, have, whole body movements where basically you're stable through your core, you're moving either through your arms and your legs, and that's going to give you functional transfer for sport or for life, much more than isolated body, isolated exercises. And you said it, Pete, if your goal is to do bodybuilding, that's fine. Or even if you want to increase the size of your arms, say. But a lot of times, if you ask people, do you want a bodybuilder body? They'd say no. But then it's like, why are you training like that? It's not functional. It's like I'm an elite athlete. I'm getting towards the end of my career, but being an elite athlete isn't healthy. You're doing things that are like top 1%. It's not healthy. Like people copying, drinking loads of Gatorade or isotonics because they see an athlete do it. It's like they're only looking for the top performance. They're not thinking about health here. So sometimes we got to be careful about who we're basing on and having a look at what they're doing, because you can copy things that won't actually help you in your day-to-day life, So it is, I think, functional exercises, being on your feet, exercises that you move through your legs where your core is trying to stay stable, you're being aware of your body. And we can talk about the paradigm I use when developing good strength, so it's not isolated. The type of exercises you want. Do you want to do that actually, or do you want to just?
Well, I was going to ask you. Let's talk about your athletic career for a second, Owen, because that was very impressive, and I want listeners to understand like your background, because you're not just talking about this. Because one of the questions I want to ask you about is your athletic career, and as you learned this and you took this approach, how did it change your training and what effects did it have? So real quick, just give us a brief, because you're an elite level runner.
I'm going to be really, really brief, because I hope we can give listeners like most value of what they want. And if people have questions, I have no problem coming back on. Basically, I'm like a 5-time national champion in Ireland here. I've ran for Ireland at World Student Games, European Seniors, from 800 meters, 1500 meters to 10,000 meters. So a nice range. I've been in the sport. I'm like 36. I've been competing at a high level since I was about 16. Highlights would be a sub 4-minute mile. I've ran sub 8 for 3K, sub 14 minutes for 5K, sub 30 minutes. So, 13 minutes, 15, 29 minutes for 10K. So like they would all be quite elite times, anything sub 30, anything sub 14 minutes for 5K or sub 4 minutes would be considered high level. And then this year, as I was European over 35 Masters champion as well. So that's just a really quick rundown.
Well, real quick about that, Owen, because congratulations on getting that European Masters championship.
Thanks so much.
And what listeners can't see is I have that kind of a little grin on my face, because how does it feel? On one hand, and I mean this sincerely, congratulations for getting that championship, because you did have to beat a whole field of competitors. But as an athlete yourself, how does it feel to be getting that old boys or that Masters title? What goes on in the mind of an athlete?
Yeah, it's funny. It's nice. It's a nice one to win. Like, in a way, it's great, because you go from competing, like I'm still competing at a good level, but it's like you're going in and you're competing against 23-year-olds, 25-year-olds, and like it's just harder to win. Like I'm working, I'm just getting on in your career. So it's actually great that you have something new where you can actually be competitive in races again and stuff like that. So in that way it's great. But it's funny. I don't some people love the Masters. It's great just to drop in, but I still try to compete with the young guns.
Well, it's funny
not as
because
successfully as in the past, but yeah, I still enjoy it.
In my late 30s, I played Masters rugby, and I did, in my late 30s until about 40, I would play Masters. And then depending on the tournament, I might pop in one or two of the open games, not the competitive matches, but I'd pop in the open games. And running around on the pitch at 38, 40 years old with people in their early 20s is it definitely wakes you up. But it was funny. My mates and I played with an Irish rugby team. I played with the Boston Irish Wolfhounds.
Oh, brilliant.
And so we played a tournament down in Florida. I think I was 38, 39 years old, and we're in the open division. And it's just, when it was a bunch of us old cranky, cantankerous, many of these Irish guys playing against a college all-star team. It was the Florida All-Stars. So most of these players were under the age of 23.
I know.
And while they're
especially rugby, like the power.
Oh man, they were so much fitter than us. But we had a great fullback who we knew tactics. So we beat them because we made them run around the pitch. We were able to drain their batteries. And so by the last 10 minutes, you had a bunch of old men just shoving it down their throats because we had played tactics and we had paced it. But when we trained, so I want to come back to your training. So as you learned this integrated approach, you went from years of elite level training. What are some of the fallbacks? Like, what injuries did you have in that earlier phase of training? What are some common injuries of runners? And did you experience that in your earlier parts of your career?
Yeah, I've had all the injuries. So nothing super bad, but like as I said, all running injuries are passive injuries. You do not, like, say a rugby player tear a muscle. You will not tear a muscle running. It doesn't happen. You get like hamstring strains, you get Achilles tendonitis, you get knee tendonitis because the muscular system is not activated when you run. It's an overload of passive structures. What happens? Plantar fasciitis. Like I could go on, hip pain. So ones I've had, I've done my ankle badly. I've had a lot of shin splints on my left side. And again, the thing that fixed that was single leg deadlift. Like not heel drops, heel raises, getting the hamstring and glute working way more, getting the foot muscles switched on to where the point where I couldn't stand on that foot. I just did single leg deadlift till I literally could not stand on the foot. Like holding for 20, 30 seconds, doing 10 reps. Then I've had knee pain. I'm still kind of working on that a little bit. I had a hip injury that's what really, I've had a good long career because of that functional approach, like, having hip hinge exercises, having knee dominant exercises, keeping my core solid. I had a hip injury in my late 20s that got me very focused on this as like I started doing sports Pilates a lot more. It became, at least once a week in my routine with strength work, because when you're younger, you can get away, your body recovers quicker. When you're older, you need to activate the muscles. You need to switch on these muscles to take pressure off the other joints. I said it's like, imagine like this is a classic Irish person making a bar fight reference, but I don't really drink, but you'll get the idea, Pete. If you're in a bar and I'm asleep and someone starts a fight on you, I'm not there, I'm asleep, I can't help you. If you're in a bar and I'm beside you and you're talking and someone starts a fight, I'm at least going to be there to help you, either diffuse it or whatever. That's essentially the same. The passive structures are always going to be there because they're just being used. If your muscles are asleep, they can't help. But if you do some like Pilates or gym work to wake those muscles up, then they're just naturally going to take pressure off those passive structures. So yeah, I've had like the hip injury was the thing that got me very focused on, hip injury was the thing that got me very focused on Pilates. And then I was doing that with patients, and then they come back and there's three things that make people not move correctly. One is a lack of mobility. Either the muscle is tight, they've got trigger points in the muscle like knots, so they need to foam roll, or the joint doesn't move correctly. So it's a mobility issue. The second thing is like an activation. They can't actually switch on the core. They can't really switch on the glutes. If they did a bridge, they just need to kind of contract the muscles to get them innervated. And the last reason is like motor control. Like they don't have the technique or awareness. So that's where I came up with the back aware belts, because when people came back, from my clinic, I would try to get them to squat and they're rounding through their backs or they're arching too much in the plank. And I was like, God, if they had me by their side all the time, they would never do what they're doing. So, I've been 3 years trying to like get that. We're finally basically ready, but it's a thing to give you feedback on your position. So yeah, that was a long-winded.
I want to talk about the integration, how you integrate Pilates into running, and then obviously we want to talk about off-season conditioning. But what occurred to me, Owen, as you're describing that, because I know for years there's been that battle between runners who like to strength train and runners who don't strength train. They just want to run.
Yeah.
In your experience, what you've seen in your 20-year career as an elite runner, how has strength training changed the running game? Are more runners adding strength training to their programs, and how has that changed the overall running landscape?
Well, elite runners do strength training anyway, because it just I keep going on. There's three things that look for running performance. The main reason you do strength training or Pilates is to prevent injuries. You need to wake up the muscles, especially when people are doing long distances, marathons, half marathons. These things don't use your muscles at all. So like we have our Pilates program. It's a grudge purchase. Like runners want to run. I don't want to do Pilates. I actually like the gym a little bit, but it's not like my favorite thing. I can just go out with my runners. I do it because I don't want a hip injury. I do it because I know if I leave it off, after a while, things start getting niggly. And you learn that the hard way. And a lot of runners, they're not told that. They do a stretch and they're sitting for 10 hours and they're then looking at me, oh, do this 30-second stretch. Why is that not working? Because you sat on your ass for 10 hours every day and you thought a 30-second stretch was going to like help you. It's not. You need concentrated work. So it's not, this isn't, it'll be good. You need to be doing this at least once a week. And it's like, I know you're not going to enjoy it. If you're looking from a performance perspective, there's three things that allow good running. The first is a VO2 max. It's just how much you can use oxygen. That's kind of God-given. You can't really change that. The second thing is your lactic threshold, which you can change. It's like, how long can you stay aerobic as opposed to anaerobic, and with lactic threshold training and heart rate training, you get better at that. And for anyone serious on running, look up a lactic threshold test, get a chest monitor strap. It's about $100, $200 maybe. If you got one test, you'd be done for life. Really important to have that in. And the last thing is running economy. It's like a car. The wheels need to be pumped up. The engine needs to be running smoothly. And with us, it's like, if you're running and you have a lot of energy leaks, so it's like, you drop a shoulder or like you're not that strong. So you hit the ground and you lose a little bit of the energy. That's like the tires being flat. So running economy, like there's been several studies to show that with strength training or kind of Pilates work, that type of work, because it can hold your core in a better position, because you get stronger, your running economy can improve. So the main thing is to prevent injury, but it does improve running economy. So it's a second benefit.
Well, Owen, I really appreciate you calling that out, because I think a lot of people overlook the fact that that's why athletes train, right? I mean, a large reason why athletes do strength training, it could be rugby, football, basketball, running, is to reduce the risk of injury. They try to control it. It's not, and that's the funny thing. I think so many people get that confused, is what I do in the weight room isn't necessarily going to make me a better rugby player or isn't going to make me a better football player. I got to go out and do the reps. I still got to go out and do the practice. All the weight room does is it makes my muscles stronger, capable of generating more energy when I need it or when anybody needs it, and should theoretically help me recover a little bit quicker. And I just want to call that out. And I want to come back to what you said about lactate threshold training. Why is lactate threshold training so important for endurance athletes? Why does training at LT, and for listeners, if you get that burning sensation in your muscles and breathing is getting pretty hard, what you're doing is you're burning more carbohydrate. You're training it at intensity, so you're burning more carbohydrate for fuel. The byproduct of carbohydrate metabolism is lactate, is blood lactate, which actually gets recycled and converted back into energy in a different process. But that blood lactate is just an indicator of the amount of glycogen or carbohydrate being used during exercise. Why is that such an important indicator, and what does that represent?
Yeah, because there's two, like you're saying there, like, so if you're using oxygen, we're always breathing, right? But like when you see a sprinter, they can nearly hold their breath as they sprint, because as you said, if you can go, your body is able to produce energy without oxygen being the primary energy source. You'll see, if anyone's ever done a 400 meters or a flat out sprint, they've got it where, as you said, your legs are burning, your muscles are burning, you can barely move, you might get sick after a race. That's the anaerobic system. That's that lactate is in your system. Now, you can't run, 5K is like 95% aerobic. And as you go up, like, the rest of them are like way more aerobic than that. It gets to 96, 97, marathons like 99.7% aerobic. So you can't improve your aerobic performance, which is what you want to do at a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon or a 10 mile. You can't improve the aerobic performance by training anaerobically. Do you know, it's like you can't, it's like if you had a car, what's that, like 100 meter sprint car race? You know, where is it Dodge? I don't know.
Oh, like the quarter mile sprint. Yeah. It's a quarter mile and you can do that in about 4 seconds, depending on your car.
Yeah. So it's like, say a quarter mile race. If you had all your engineers training for a quarter mile, but then put it into the Le Mans 24 hour and wondered why the hell you're not doing well. And it's the same thing. So if you know your lactic, when we're working as well, if we have heart rates, it's like some days you're going to be tired, some days you're going to be a little bit more stressed. You just go on the heart rate. If you're tired, you'll just naturally run slower, but you'll still be at that lactic threshold zone. If you're doing it off times or just like really going hard, you're training anaerobically, which is not how you're going to race. So you're training the wrong system and it feels harder. If you don't have a heart rate monitor, the way you would do it is singing one line of a song. So if you were able to go, happy birthday to you, and then had to take a breath, you were probably at lactic threshold. If you're running and it's like, happy birthday to, and you're having to take a breath before you can finish the sentence, you need to slow down. And it's counterintuitive. When I started this type of training, I came from 800 meters, which is, 50% anaerobic. So I was very good at the anaerobic side. And I remember starting to train aerobically and it felt like I was cheating. I was like, this is so easy. It's ridiculous. There's no getting sick. There's no really burning legs. But I ran better. I actually qualified for Ireland at the 10K cross country because all of a sudden I was actually training my aerobic system predominantly, which I hadn't been doing before. I had been training my anaerobic system and trying to use that, an inefficient system, to get around.
Well, I'm going to, because a colleague of mine many years ago, when I worked at the American Council on Exercise, a colleague of mine had qualified for it wasn't the sprint, it wasn't the Ironman, it was the Olympics. She had qualified like in the over 40. I think she was 44 to 40. She was 40 to 44 maybe at the time, but she had qualified in the Olympic triathlon distance for the Worlds. But she was having a problem in finishing her races. She would bonk and lose carbohydrate. And what we found, my colleague and I, he did the testing on her. We found that, and this is for listeners, we found that she was training at too high of an intensity, just like you described, Owen, because if you train it, if many runners and many cyclists think they need to go hard and they need to feel the work, but if you're doing that, you deplete carbohydrate, and muscles only have, your body only holds maybe 40, 50 minutes of carbohydrate. After 40 or 50 minutes, you need to go into, you're either going to convert amino acids into fuel, or you need some kind of carbohydrate source. And the timing is going to be off depending on the individual.
But not even that. The anaerobic system, you're so right. It's like there's a thing even past the carbohydrate. It's just that, as you were saying, if you train past about 80 to 90%, if you start going to like 95%, it's too hard an intensity for you to use oxygen efficiently. So you start going to that inefficient system called the anaerobic system, whereas you're going to start feeling that lactic. So what you want to do is, I don't know if people are going to see this, but say here's my lactic threshold line. If I'm training here aerobically, what I want to do is, if I train aerobically, I'm basically like just topping that up a little. So all my training, if I'm kind of hitting here like that, over time, the speed I can go and the speed basically, because the intensity will feel the same, it goes up to here. Okay, so now when I'm running, I can run at a much faster pace and stay aerobic. If you're here and you start training too hard, you never move this up. You just get better at training here. And in the race, like, you can't stay here for that long. That's what's going to happen. You're going to go off hard. You're always going to die in the middle of the race. And at the end, you'll be able to give a big sprint because you can kind of gut it in and you're good at the aerobic. But it's counterintuitive. You need to train at 80-85%. You top this one up, and then you have a new capability to train at that. And then you still can go into your anaerobic at the end of the race. But
well, and that's that's my understanding of for distance athletes is the purpose of tempo days and sprint days is to train at a race pace, to train at a tempo.
Yeah.
Like if you're training for like a 1500 meter, you might run 400 or 800 splits at that 1500 meter tempo, but you're not going to run the full 1500 tempo. But what you're doing is you're maybe doing one training day a week where you're running at threshold to try to bump. And what he was showing for listeners, is showing it using his hands to show the red line. So that doing most of your training aerobically, when you do a threshold run and you do that threshold day, it allows you to elevate your threshold so you can stay aerobic longer, yes, which allows you to spare your glycogen. So when you do need to pull in for that final 200 to 300 meter burst in the 800 meters, and when you said that earlier about the 400 meter, I had a funny image, man. I used to do the 200 and 400 when I was training competitively for rugby, man. I learned very well how to time the first 300 meters, because the first couple of times I try to run a 400, obviously as a meathead, I go all out.
Yeah.
200 meters into it, I'm just like, that last 200 meters is excruciating.
Yeah, rough.
But learning how to pace yourself so you learn how to kick in that final 50 to 80 meters really makes all the difference in the world. But that's energetically. And I appreciate that conversation, because I don't think people really understand that a lot of runners out there train too hard. And I know that sounds
way too,
just as you're saying, we need to be aerobic. Now let's shift gears a little bit, because I want to talk biomechanics. At what point were you introduced to Pilates, and why did you start integrating Pilates in your running training?
Mainly because of that hip injury. I've changed my Pilates is different than other Pilates. So it differs in two ways. When you do physiotherapy here and you're doing rehabilitation, I would have done courses in Pilates. And then I would have had like the Gray Cook FMS stuff that I was like engrossed in. And I know there's Shirley Sharman and there's like Vladimir Yandan, everyone there. So I had these ideas, and then I like calling it, it's a modified version of Pilates, but people at least understand what Pilates is. When he was calling it functional fitness, didn't have a clue what I was talking about. So, but the Pilates was really good for the movement base, to get, like, as we were talking about at the start, well-rounded, like, good balance, good like knee dominant exercises, activating the glutes, activating the glute medius on the side with clam muscles, activating the core. What I do with sports Pilates is, when I activate the muscles on the ground, I get them on their feet. So we try to get used to using the muscles nearly isolated with like our bridging or in our core exercises like Superman, but then get on your feet and hold the same good form in standing exercises that replicate exercises that you might do in running. And then I found they were the things that kind of kept my hips injury free, that kept like everything correct. And then if I was doing the gym, that's always where I start as well. So if I think of it as a pyramid, it's like at the base is good movement ability through different ranges. And then, actually I'll leave it at that there for a second. That's why I started. It helps prevent injury and I got good range of motion. But the two things I do that I don't agree with in Pilates is, one, get on your feet more so you get used to using the muscles that you've activated, and second, keep a neutral spine. I hate all that like imprinting on the floor, roll down, stuff like that. I like just getting people aware of a neutral spine a lot more.
Well, let's stay with, why is it so important to do that isolation work on the floor? What about floor work allows muscles to kind of reset and re-educate themselves would be the term I would use.
Yeah, you just want to make it, you need to drop it back down as simple as needed for the person to kind of consciously start contracting the muscles. Because we get like a little bit of, say, gluteal amnesia, like you're sitting on your bum muscles 10 hours, they essentially switch off. So if I got someone up and tried to get them doing like a single leg deadlift or a squat, and then for to contract their muscles correctly, they just don't have them switched on. So there's two things you need to do. When we have good movement, as we said, mobility is the first thing. You need to get the joints moving correctly again. And then the next level is like stability, is activation. And the easiest way to activate them is like on the ground. Like, you know, arch your back, come all the way up, lift your stomach up away from the ground. It gets you used to just like contracting the core muscles. Squeeze your bum, come up into a bridge and repeat the action enough times till they start feeling the glutes burning. And then when you have the mobility and you have the muscles essentially fired up from like easy, you know, like a bridge is easy to do. Squeeze your bum, lift your hips into the air, push your feet hard into the ground, like keep your belly button in. Like these are, after a couple of weeks, these are easy. Then you have the building blocks to get back on your feet. And now you can work on what we call motor control, like the technique. Get the technique, you know, keep the knees out. They have the muscles firing so they can do it correctly. So that's why we start with on the ground and then move up.
Well, no, I like that. I mean, it's a great way because the way I learned it is isolate. We got to isolate the strength, re-educate, kind of reactivate the muscles.
Yes.
And the one thing, Owen, I've always looked at is I always look at floor work, at groundwork, is kind of removing gravity, right? I mean, because when you're running,
yeah, I like that.
You have to deal with gravity and ground reaction. You have to deal with those competing forces. And for listeners, ground reaction is every time you step on the ground, there's a force going up through your foot and into your leg that, depending on your pace of running, can be up to about 5 or 6 times your body weight in each leg. And so what I love about that, Owen, and what I love how you're describing it, is people don't realize, I think they don't realize that sometimes we need to back off what we're doing, go down on the floor and go through a phase of kind of, I personally do this. And right now we're recording this in late November, early December of 2022. Usually I use this time of year personally as kind of a reset period between Thanksgiving and Christmas, where I do a lot of like the reset work to kind of like, I've been training hard all year long. I'm still active, but because of all the stuff that's going on this time of year, I don't try to overload my system with exercise.
Yes.
I purposely back off exercise and focus on mobility, focus on stretching, and focus on realignment. That way, when I get back into January, and I try to coach clients on this too, that way, when we get back to January, we've kind of had a reset of the system. Do you kind of practice the same thing? Because right now, as a runner, this is off season for you. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about off-season conditioning. How do you approach off-season conditioning as a runner, and how do you coach your clients on that as a physiotherapist?
Yeah, I think the cycling through things is so important, like resetting. So like even in a gym perspective, I'll always have movement at the base. Then we'll do like work capacity, and work capacity is like anatomical adaptation. It's the ability to tolerate load. So what that means is like, you know, reps of 12, reps of 15, just getting your body generally strong. Like, so it gets used to doing, say, a squatting pattern with weight. Once you have that, then you can develop maximal strength because you have a body that's robust. And when you have strength, you have force in the muscles, then you can generate power. Then you can generate like plyometrics or speed, and cycling people through that. And it's the same with running. The amount of runners I have, if they've done a marathon in the fall, and then they're talking about, I'm going to do a spring marathon. It's like, no. Your body needs a break. It needs a break. You need to reset if you've had a peak. And that peak for them would be a couple of weeks off. I would then really emphasize, you know, do shorter distances, do your Pilates, get the movement base strong again. and then build back up. And maybe in the spring, do your shorter distances, get like better efficiency in your running, allow the body to reset. And then if you want to do a marathon again, you do one a year, you got your 16-week block, and build to the fall again. Otherwise, you're going to increase your chance of injury, and you plateau a lot more because your body just gets used to that kind of sameness of training where it needs a reset to absorb the training it's done, and it needs then to go through the different levels, be it, as you said, that triangle for fitness training or in the gym, or be it for running, that if you're doing a lot of distance work, you do come down to kind of more speed work. Or if you've done a lot of speed work, maybe you have a time where you're building your aerobic base and come back up to that. But everything needs to be in like a kind of periodized approach where, you know, you change the goals every so often.
Well, let's just break this down real quick, Owen. As we're looking at this right now, we're going into December, January, and I assume no matter where people are, unless they're in the extreme southern United States, or unless they're somewhere below the hemisphere, and if they're listening in one of the funny talking places like Australia or New Zealand, where it's actually their summertime right now. But let's take a look for most people in North America or in Ireland, the UK. Going into this time of year, like December, January, February, assume that a lot of people are training indoors. And let's say I'm that average recreational runner where every year I like to do maybe 1 or 2 10Ks, maybe a couple 5Ks, and maybe one marathon. How should I approach running during the winter right now in the off-season phase? What should my indoor workouts look like right now?
Yeah, so let's say you're going to be doing 5Ks or 10Ks in like February or March, and then you'll maybe 5Ks and you'll do 10Ks in 10Ks a little bit later in the summer, and then you'll start from July to a marathon or a half marathon base for September, and then you'll break again. First thing is, once you've done your big event, you know, take a couple of weeks off, try something different. Maybe it's yoga you do, maybe it's like hiking, maybe it's like a bike, just something that like take that pressure off and just let the body reset for about 2 weeks. Then you want to go into like just general training, and general training for me might look like one Pilates session, one gym session, one speed session, and then one threshold work, and then maybe one moderately long run. Because one thing while I would say you need different focuses, there is a thing called the acute to chronic workload ratio. And what that means, what the research in that looked at is, it's not the amount of load or the intensity you work at, it's sudden spikes in that intensity or sudden spikes in that load. So if I know in the future I will be going back to like very long running, I might want to keep like a 10-mile run in every like 2 or 3 weeks, just so that when I go back to like say 11, 12, 13, it's not such a shock to my body. Like I haven't just been doing 5 miles runs. Same for me, like if I'm going to do faster running now in February for indoors, like 3K, I'll still be doing strides or a little bit of speed work now. So what you want to do is, as I said, just have a nice general mix when you're in your off season. You might have concentrate on your you know, getting your body healthy, be it yoga, Pilates, maybe one gym session, concentrate on one speed session, which is nice variety, and one kind of tempo session, and maybe one longer run, and that's 5 days in the week. And then when you have your goal, you can look at maybe like 6 to 8 weeks out. If it's a 5K, you start maybe dialing in towards more 5K specific work. Take a week or 2 off, and then you could dial back into like 10K specific work. Take a week or 2 off, you can dial back into like half marathon or a marathon block.
No, I like that, because that's why I wanted to ask that, Owen, and why I wanted to speak with you. I want listeners to have that formula for if it's wintertime now, don't grind yourself, right? We have this, I mean, here we are, we have this like 24-hour hustle grind. I got to get up and go. People take pictures of their watches at 4:30 in the morning because I got to go out and do my work and put my miles in. But everything we know about the body is we don't always need to work. What's the role of rest, and how often? Say you get done. Say I'm a recreational runner.
Yeah,
I've done my 5K and I'm getting ready for a 10K. At 5K, I shouldn't need much rest time. That's 3.2 miles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's if I'm running consistently. There's not. I look at a 5K as maybe take 2 days of just rest.
Yeah,
But
it
if
would
I
depend.
push,
It depend if you had. If I was going to try run a PR, say, for a 5K, I wouldn't just target one 5K. I would have like, I would have a series of them. I would have like maybe one, and then 2 weeks later I'd have another, and 2 weeks later I'd have another, and then I might take a week off. Do you know what I mean? So I might have an 8 week block where I'm building up, and then I'd have a series of 5K races. So I might be doing a lot more threshold work, then getting into specific 5K work, and then with a long run, try a race, see how it goes. If I don't run a PR, or even if I do, take, as you said, a day, 2 days easy, and then get back into training for the next 2 weeks, hit that race, a day, 2 days easy into training, and hit your last race. And then at least you've had a little series of them. And more likely, you're probably going to run better in the second or the third one. Your body's just got used to trying to run fast for only 3.2 miles.
No, I like that. And I like that repetition. And because I think a lot of people, especially runners, I don't know why, but runners always seem to enjoy being hurt. Every time I talk to runners, it's like they got some injury. And again, you're putting a lot of stress on the body.
Yeah.
But why is rest so important? I mean, we've learned a hell of a lot more about rest, and we understand it a lot better now, I think, over the last 10 or 12 years. How has your approach to recovery changed as we've learned more about that process in the body?
Yeah, well, I used to not take a rest day, and I always have to take one now, especially as you get older. Like in the rest, like training stresses you, but it's actually in the rest time, we call it the invisible training. It's like, what can you do in that time that allows a super compensation for you to get fitter? So you need that rest period, but it needs to be structured. Like I think what you said, it's like having different. A lot of times what happens is people just don't have structure. Like you're confident now in what you're doing, of not training, say, as hard, because in January, February, that's when you're going to go back in. That gives you confidence. When people are just aimlessly running and then happen to like enter a race, is when you get like issues, and that's why a lot of people do the marathons. It gives them like one set goal, where they should be doing that the whole time. It's like, okay, February, look up 5Ks near my area, 5Ks within 2 hour radius of me. There's going to be loads of them, and just book them in, and then just work backwards from there. And then if you do, you don't feel guilty if you take a week to recover, to a week to take off every like 2 months, because you're getting back into a decent block of training. So rest is really important. One, in the short term, that it allows you to recover and benefit from the training. But two, the second one is that mental rest and that general like restoration of the body. If you're just constantly running and there's a lack of variety in your training, it doesn't let things to recuperate. You don't give the body loves variety, and it needs different stresses. If the stress is just constantly like running the whole time, that's where you break down. That's where you get injuries, because you have a lack of variety. So the same part of the joint is taking that load. The same part of the tendon or the ligament is taking the load. As opposed to someone like yourself, say, doing more movement work now, maybe doing some more balance work, then maybe some strength work, then maybe some speed work, while also keeping a little bit of the thing that they're going to do in the future in currently, but just different focuses and different goals.
Well, and we're going to wrap it up here, but I really like that idea of you calling out the structured rest, because I think you're 100% right. A lot of recreational individuals out there, people training recreationally, lack that structure because they lack a specific purpose. And that's why, and you called it out exactly right. Like right now, I feel comfortable. I just did a gym session this morning before we're hitting record, and I was just using body weight, using the TRX, using mobility exercises. And to your point, I know that for the next few weeks, I'm not beating my body up. I'm working on recharging the system so that when I do go back into, and I'm saying this for listeners, I'm planning like a big heavy strength phase, because I got a new blood flow restriction product. I'm playing with some BFR.
Oh, brilliant!
Company sent me a new electronic BFR product to test, and I've had a couple people, I've had a couple experts talking about blood flow restriction. So I'm gonna play with that again this spring. That's why right now I'm focused on kind of mobility and realignment. But to your point, if you are structuring rest, Rest does not mean sitting on the couch, watching Netflix and eating eating
Yeah,
Uber
exactly.
Eats. You know what I mean? It's like you have to have structure. So I look at it personally. I do body weight stuff. I walk, I hike, I maybe do some easy bike rides. And here's the other thing, folks, that's really important. If you're going into a rest phase, pay attention to your caloric intake. Because
Yes.
if you're not putting out the same energy level, if you're not doing 8, 10, 12, 15-kilometer training runs, you don't need to eat for that. So I'm saying that purposely because right now, even though it's a holiday season, as I'm kind of dialing back my exercise intensity, personally, I'm also dialing back I'm paying more attention to my nutrition
Yeah.
and really trying to nail that down. Let's wrap this up because you talk about Pilates and you mentioned something about keeping a neutral spine. And that is so critical, whether you're doing strength training, whether you're running, whatever you're doing. Why do we really need to pay attention to body position? What is it about maintaining a neutral spine that can help our performance, whether a runner or anything else we might be doing?
One, it's like, I'm a biomechanist. So like having things in line allow like the muscles to be at their optimal length, allows the forces to go evenly through the joint. Do you know, if I have a hand and a runner, like a trainer a sneaker gets placed on my hand, it's sore. If someone's wearing a high heel and it comes down on my hand, it's probably going to break a bone. So it's the same thing. If we have things lined up effectively, one, the muscles are in the optimal lengths, and two, the forces through the body are getting distributed evenly. So it's not just about doing the correct exercises, it's about doing the correct exercises correctly. And like that's, as you said, it's either a mobility issue that it's tight, it's either they can't activate the right muscles, or it's an awareness issue. And yeah, that's why I came up with the back aware belt, to give people that awareness of when they're in that position, to practice it in basic exercises and then practice it when they're on their feet.
So using the back aware belt, that allows people to kind of feel the difference between being in good form and being in bad form.
Yeah, it vibrates if you're in a bad form, or you can see it like on your app. You'll see if you arch your back, it'll go out of the kind of neutral spine range. If you round your back, it'll go out with the neutral spine range. So it's just to give people, like, as if the people have you, Pete, it's ideal. But sometimes even for you, like as a training aid for your clients, because I know I've seen it so often. It's like if they could see or feel, if I could get into their body, they would not move like that. And I see that loads of times in the gym. You're like, oh, bleach my eyes, please don't move like that. You're going to hurt yourself,
And that for listeners, I mean, that's exactly what I try to do with this podcast, right? That's why I started trying to do that. Is there's a lot of us that make a living watching other people move. And I know that sounds a little weird, right? I mean, but that's what we do. You have a PhD in biomechanics. I've been studying people moving in the gym for more than 20 something years. And really, I like the product, the back aware belt, and I like what you're doing, integrating Pilates with running, because those of us who understand movement understand the need, A, for feedback, and that's what the belt provides, because it allows you to know in position, and B, changing up your training stimulus. I think that the number one mistake, and I don't know if you could agree with me, Owen, but the number one mistake, in my opinion, is that people do not change up their training stimulus enough, or the other side of that coin is they change up their training too often. There's no consistency and no progression, no consistent progression in the workout. Those are just my two observations. In your professional experience, what's a very common injury, or what's a very common mistake by recreational runners, by runners who are enthusiastic, they love the recreation running, but what's a common mistake they make?
I was going to say lack of variety as well, like just constantly doing the same thing. And I also think, like, just even for, if people are listening to this podcast, I don't know if you do coaching, Pete, but like, invest in yourself. If you're putting in the time and effort into your training, it's just baffling that, like, that time and effort could be so much better spent, and it's like when you have a coach, when you have someone, a lot of the mistakes I was going to mention just get ignored, because, like, say if yourself, Pete, the way you're saying, oh, I'm transitioning here, I think it's so good to have that accountability and to have that trust in someone. So the main ones I would see is, a lack of variety. They just constantly do the same training, and a lack of intentionality, not being like, this is the goal for now. Like you said it brilliantly there. It's like, okay, the goal here is restore my movement, get good movement, because I'm going into a strength block. the fact that you know that, I know we've done this for several years, so we inherently know that, but the amount of people that do have no like forward plan of what they're going to do, and then they just kind of waste basically time and effort, that like they're doing the hard bit, they're going out for training, but they're doing the wrong training because it's not planned or it's not considered, is criminal.
Well, and I appreciate you mentioning that about the coaching, mate, because I look at it, and that's the reason why I write my books. Is if I were coaching people individually, I'd probably be using the books to hit people in the head.
Yeah. Like the information's out there, like so.
Read, it's like, and that's what. But what I like about talking, especially since we've never met before, and you're coming at this from obviously you're in Ireland and your schooling was in Canada, and you're coming from, you have a slightly different background. What I love about this is when we have these type of conversations, the principles are the same, and that's the.
I was just thinking the same thing. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, is that you should hear a consistent thread. You should hear a consistent message: rest, variety, pay attention to nutrition, pay attention to your sleep. And I love the fact that you're calling out hiring a coach. You're calling out hiring somebody that can give you that other point of view. Well, Owen, how can people find out about the Back Aware Belt? How can people find out? Because you do have an online Pilates program for runners. And again, you're not just a physiotherapist. You're somebody who studies biomechanics, but you're also an elite level runner. I mean, you have a couple running titles under your belt. So I love the fact that you're coming at it from both the academic perspective and you're coming at it from the practical, real world, experiential perspective.
Yeah, and it does help because I think, as I said, sometimes with lectures, it's like some of them just have it, like they know something in theory, but they've never applied it. It's baffling. But yeah, if anyone wants, I have a book called How to Get to the Line in the Best Shape Possible. It's just some articles that I've done for different newspapers here in Ireland, and you can get that at Everard, EVERARD, Pilates, PILATES.com/book. If people want a free trial of the Pilates for a week, it's everardpilates.com/sport free trial. And then for the Back Aware Belt, you can just go to backawarebelt.com. We're just getting new units now, so there's a bit of a delay.
Well, hey, everything's been on delay and everything. And that's at some point I'll be sourcing all about fitness products and fitness equipment. But
that's not
on my agenda yet. And I think, but I have a lot of respect for people. You identified a need. You took a shot, you created a belt, you have an app with it. And I think it just people getting that feedback, some sort of basic level feedback can help bump up and accelerate their training. Well, hey, Owen, I really appreciate your time today. And I appreciate the conversation about how or what people should be doing in the off season to prepare for a successful running season in 2023 and beyond.
Pete, thanks so much. I really enjoyed that. That was brilliant.
Cheers.